Greetings, fellow Mist Wanderers. My name is Steve Morgan and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft. So if you're familiar with some of my other videos, I have a series of videos called How I Ran Domain of Dread, based on my experiences running a 5th edition domain hopping Ravenloft campaign that's been to a whole variety of places at this point. Volkovnia, Valachan, I'm drawing a blank, more than that. However, in the past, they've always been domains that I have actually run and have first-hand experience running, and so when I say, here's some monster suggestions, here's some adventure ideas, they're probably ones that I've done. But there are a bunch of domains in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft that I probably won't run and haven't run in the past, but I still wanted to talk about them, and one of them is Lamordia. So this is the first that is now called How I'd Run domain. I haven't got direct experience running it, but if I were to run it, I would be considering these monsters, these adventures, this stat block for the Darklord, and so on. It hopefully means it'll be a shorter video, because when I do those videos, I lay out all the stuff that I added, and then I'll say, and this is how it went down, and I won't be doing the, and this is how it went down part of the video. I should stress this isn't an adventure that I'm sort of setting for you, where it's levels 1 to 5, and you can do this, and then this, and then this. Although there will be adventure ideas, this is rather an ideas dump and inspiration for, as I said, monsters, adventures, etc., beyond what's already included in Van Richten's Guide. Van Richten's Guide is a great starting point, but it's, there's plenty more monsters you can add, there's plenty more things you can do, and so I'll be covering that. I'm not going to go deep into the lore for Lamordia. That's fun to say. This video assumes that you've read the chapter maybe, or at least skimmed through it, have a rough idea of what the domain is like, the Darklord is like, what places there are, and so on. I don't want to necessarily repeat what's already in the book, because this video will probably be already long enough without that. I'd also like to give a spoiler warning, this is important. There is the recent Ravenloft novel, Heir of Strahd, that only came out a couple of months ago, that we're going to borrow some of that stuff for this. So if you haven't read that novel yet, and you want to read that novel without any surprises, without having seen any spoilers, I suggest stopping this now, reading the novel, coming back. But in a few minutes' time I will be talking about how and why Heir of Strahd can be used for Lamordia. Let's talk about sources first of all. The obvious one is Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, the official 5th edition look at Lamordia. I also like to borrow from older lore and older editions, and a great way to do that is online through the Mistopedia wiki, the Fraternity of Shadows Ravenloft wiki. Obviously it's not 5th edition, although I think they do have a page about the 5th edition version of Lamordia. It's all pre-5th edition stuff, so it may not fit, it may need reworking, but it's great for additional lore and ideas and so on. There is an old Ravenloft novel called Mordenheim. It's not one of the ones I've read. I've read most of the Ravenloft novels, but not this one. It's the pre-5th edition, different Darklord. I'll talk more about the Darklord and the changes to the Darklord later on, so please bear that in mind when you read it. VRGtR number 2 contains information about Lamordia. One of the old Van Richten's guides from pre-5th edition is called Van Richten's Guide to the Created. It's still available on DM's Guild. I've heard that that's really useful for Lamordia. There's an old Lamordia adventure called Adam's Wrath, and there's also a conversion guide someone's done, so if you wanted to play Adam's Wrath in 5th edition, you'd have to get both, the original adventure and the conversion guide, but you can do that. I've not gotten Adam's Wrath or the conversion guide for it, but I did use the conversion guide for Castles Forlorn by the same author, the same conversion guide creator, and it was good, so I'm sure it would be useful. There was a comic/graphic novel called Orphan of Agony Isle, and that is all about Viktra Mordenheim and about Lamordia, so I've not read it, but if I were to run Lamordia, I would buy that and I would read it. Heir of Strahd. Right, I gave that spoiler warning earlier. In Heir of Strahd, they obviously go to Barovia and meet Strahd, but they take an adventure outside of Barovia and go to Lamordia, and then towards the end of the novel, they leave Lamordia and go back to Barovia and finish up stuff in Barovia, have a final battle with Strahd. So they leave Barovia for a bit and go to Lamordia, meet Viktra Mordenheim, go to a few different places. So if you are thinking of running Lamordia and haven't read Heir of Strahd, then I think it would be really useful for you. There is a Carnival of Lost Souls adventure. There are a series of adventures. I think I looked at the one for Valachan when I ran Valachan. They've also done one for Lamordia. It's called The Hardest of Hearts. And I also found 2 other interesting looking adventures on DM's Guild that were Lamordia focused and I believe 5th edition focused. One was called the God Engine and the other was called the Sinister Plot of Dr Viktra Mordenheim. And lastly, while I don't own it, I've heard a few people say that the 5th edition adventure Rime of the Frost Maiden would be very suited for Lamordia because it's set in an icy landscape. Some of the monsters and environmental rules could work well. I don't own it and haven't looked at it, but if you already own it, you might want to look at that for stuff you can add to Lamordia as well. Talking about the domain as a whole, first of all, there's obviously the map in Van Richten's Guide, which is great. I do love the maps in Van Richten's Guide. I think all of them look fantastic. I would consider extreme cold rules. I think it does actually say this in Van Richten's Guide, actually, for when they're traveling around. I'm familiar with these rules through Curse of Strahd for when people head up Selenka Pass and go to the Amber Temple. If they're not wearing cold weather clothes, it's Constitution saving throws or they slowly get exhausted by the extreme cold. That's the name of the rule. I think it makes sense when they're wandering around outside of maybe some of the cities, like if they're just literally in the sort of icy wilderness, then that could apply as well. A potential hazard you could add, I think this is in Rime of the Frost Maiden, but it's also in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, are avalanches. So there are rules for how avalanches might trigger and what the saving throw is and what the potential damage could be and stuff like that. I think if I were considering Lamordia, I'd definitely include that. And I found 2 great write-ups on Reddit. They were comments to other posts, which I'll include links for in the description. There was a great write-up about the domain and its people, and I found a great write-up for Ludendorff, one of the cities, as well. Time to talk about the Darklord, Dr Viktra Mordenheim. So in pre-5th edition, the Doctor was called Dr Viktra Mordenheim, so they did a gender swap for 5th edition. I did see a cool thing where somebody said you can have your cake and eat it too. Rather than Viktra being a swap of Victor, Viktra is Victor's daughter / successor. So I'll include a link for that in the description. Someone went to detail describing how that could work and how you can sort of have both elements. In 5th edition, Victor is the Darklord, but in the Old Law, it wasn't Victor who was the Darklord, it was Adam who was Victor's creation, essentially his Frankenstein's monster. And similar to Old Law, Viktra is not the land's ruler, and this was the same with Adam and Victor in the previous edition. The ruler in 5th edition is called Baron von Orbrecher, and the reason this is important is because with a lot of Domains of Dread, the ruler of the land, you think of somebody like Strahd or Azalin or whoever else, usually the ruler of the land is the Darklord. So you can have an interesting scenario where the PCs want to escape Lamordia, or they want to beat up whoever the Darklord is, and they're like, right, who rules this land? And they're extra towards Baron von Orbrecher and think, right, this person's got to be the Darklord, but it's not, it's Viktra. Still talking about the Darklord, let's talk about art. There are a few sources. One is Van Richten's Guide. The back cover of the hardcover version of Heir of Strahd has a picture of Viktra. I bought it on Kindle when I read Heir of Strahd and then listened to the audiobook through Spotify, but I saw some people share that online, which is pretty cool, share a picture or a photo of that. And of course there's the comic that I mentioned earlier, Orphan of Agony Isle, and I'm sure you could borrow some pictures from that and show your players for them to get a vibe of what she looks like. And it's good for role players as well to kind of see her expressions, mannerisms and things like that through the drawings. Good that in the comic you're likely going to be lots of them, as opposed to like how there's just one in Van Richten's Guide, I believe. I don't think there's more than one. And the one in Heir of Strahd. Stat block. Van Richten's Guide suggests spy. There's a whole thing about how some of the stat block choices for Darklords in Van Richten's Guide are criticised by people. And I'm not saying this in their defence, but you know, the book assumes that they only have access as a minimum, or somebody buying it only has access as a minimum to the Monster Manual and Van Richten's Guide. So you can only draw from monsters from that. Plus, and this isn't true of the new Monster Manual, I'm going to talk about that in an upcoming video, I think, but the old Monster Manual didn't have great NPC, like humanoid NPC standard people stat blocks. You know, and a lot of them were like lower challenge rating, like spy and, you know, bandit and things like that. I would consider, if it were me, either Transmuter or Necromancer from Van Richten's Guide, updated in Modern Kingdom Presents Monsters of the Multiverse, or potentially Spymaster from the 2024 version of the Monster Manual. So as I mentioned a minute ago, it looks like the 2024 version of the Monster Manual has better NPC stat blocks and like more variety. So it's like, instead of one version of Spy, there's like 3, and they do that across the board with some of the others. I think there's multiple nobles and stuff like that. And of course, ultimately it depends on what level your players are going to be. if your players are at a low level. Spy with a few changes, or maybe Transmuter that I mentioned is good. If they're a higher level, maybe Necromancer or Spymaster, as I mentioned. If they're a really high level, maybe they're not good enough and you might have to homebrew something or find some other stat block that's a much higher challenge rating. And let's talk about her construct creation ability. She can, and I quote, create any construct or corporeal undead by working in her laboratory for a number of uninterrupted days equal to this creature's challenge rating. At the end of the final day, the creature is complete and obeys her will. She uses his ability to create flesh golems and homunculi, as well as zombies, death heads, and brains in jars. So her base, her lair, if you will, can be full of stuff. And even if the players, say, went in there and defeated a few, came back, maybe there's some more later on, you know, she can just create stuff, be adding stuff all the time. Some of them might be doing tasks for her, some of them might be guardians and patrolling the grounds, that kind of thing. So you can have a lot of fun with that, I think. I'll talk more about monsters in a minute. Let's move on to maps. So I found 2 city maps for the 2 main cities, for Ludendorff and, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, I'm so sorry, Neufurchtenberg? Neufurchtenberg. I want to say that's right, it probably isn't. Both of these maps are by a Reddit user called Our Administrative. I included a link to their profile in the description. They look great. The interesting one about Ludendorff is that when I looked at it, I was like, it looks upside down based on how Lamordia is and where the sea and the river goes. And then if you look at the compass, it actually is showing south is up. I think that's an interesting choice. If it were me, I would just turn it upside down, and especially one that doesn't have writing then, and then not all the writing's upside down, and maybe use that version so its orientation matches the Lamordia map. DM Andy, who is a great map maker, has done a lot for Curse of Strahd and Barovia, but has done some other Domains of Dread, and I tend to use his city maps for different things. I used, in fact, I reused the village of Barovia. I needed a long street, and I reused the village of Barovia for a long street in Demonlieu. So, and then I used one I think he made for Oder or Odiari. I can't remember the pronunciation, but I think he's made one for that, and I used that for Demonlieu as well. And he has an adventure that was done in conjunction with Lunch Break Heroes called Zombies Attack, and that has city maps and sewer maps. And that brings me quite comfortably onto sewer maps, because it does talk about in the domains information about sewers, steam power driven by boiling sewers, fuels clockwork conventions, and massive cranes in the city of Ludendorff. It's the wording. So yeah, there might be times they need to go in the sewers. I'm a big fan of, again, don't know the pronunciation, Che and Peku is what I say, could be completely wrong. Their maps are incredible, and I've recommended them a few times. They have some sewer tunnel maps, but then I'm also on Patreon subscribed to Neutral Party and Dice Grimorium. They have a lot more generic maps of stuff, like if you just need like random encounter outdoors, they're great for that kind of thing. And speaking of which, if you need snowy terrain maps, Neutral Party and Dice Grimorium are great for those as well. I'll have some examples on the screen in front of me of different places. Some of them are roads, some of them are near rivers, things like that, of just different scenarios you could use while your players are traveling from A to B through the snow and the ice. If you need steam-powered ships, I recommend Limathron. I heavily recommended Limathron for the Sea of Sorrows, because they do loads of different ship maps and different types of ships, and one of their variants of one of their ships are steam-powered ships. So you could potentially use those for if the PCs need to ride somewhere, and to maybe to one of the islands, and some sailors give them passage on their ship. You've got some steam-powered ships. I think Limathron also does some coastal maps, but I don't know if any of them are potentially like snowy ones, like say if there's like variants that have snow on them. Moving on to Viktra's Lab. 2 Minute Tabletop has a great steampunk laboratory battle map that could be Viktra's Lab. Similarly, Che and Peku have a Chimera Creation Forge map, and they have a variant where it doesn't show a Chimera, although Chimera does not look like a kind of creature that Viktra would probably want to experiment on or create. And there are day and night versions of that available as well. And I even found a fan-made Schloss Mordenheim map from Adam's Wrath. Somebody made it on Dungeon Draft and put it on DM's Guild. I'd just like to mention as well, none of this is paid promo, none of the map makers I've mentioned have paid me anything to mention them. I'm just a fan, I'm just sharing what I've found out there that might be useful to Lamordia. Music. Big fan, as always, of tabletop audio, and I'll put some suggestions next to me of some different things that might work. This first list is things that might work when they're sort of just traveling between points. I call it like world map, or Lamordia map, I guess would be more accurate. I'd probably suggest music-only versions for all of them. So if you're signed up to Tabletop Audio's patron, you can get music-only versions. There is one, though, called Ice Throne that doesn't have a music-only version. It has got the sound of wind in it, though, so I reckon it could still work really well. I actually used that for Slanka Pass in Curse of Strahd. For the combat music, I found this great suggestion called Whiteout. It's quite full-on. It gets a bit sort of loud and intense, but I think it would be good for, when they're wandering through the domain and then they encounter a monster and have got to fight it. Two more good suggestions for world map travel. I think one of them could work well for if it's travel on foot. One of them could work well if it's traveling on a ship. For Viktra's lab, try one of these. I'm going to sort of slow down. You might want to pause the video and make a note of these, because I appreciate I'm whizzing through them all. And for one of the cities, you might want to use one of these. Folkhaven and Capes and Canes especially sound very sort of Victorian style city, and Icebound Town sounds like it was like a small fishing village. I don't know if there are small fishing villages in Lamordia. Maybe it's one you just use for like a small port village or something like that. It's time to go through monsters. So there are already a lot in Van Richten's guide, and so I'm not going to repeat those. Although one or two of these might be repeated, I'm going to try and cover ones that aren't already in there. So if I do miss something, check that it's not already in Van Richten's guide, and if it's not in Van Richten's guide and I don't mention it, please leave it as a comment, because it could be useful for other people. And there's a few angles. So we talked earlier about Viktra's construct creation angle, so any constructed undead or constructs. I would be thinking of, on the constructs front, I'd be thinking of stuff that's animated, like animated armor, or anything that's clockwork. I think this might be a new edition from 5th edition. There's a talk of icy fae spirits. So that's good that you can have, rather than just like typical sort of icy monsters or beasts, that you can also have fae spirits. I think that could work well, and I'll mention a few of those. And then just generally anything that's like icy, snowy, tundra, anything with like the Arctic tag. You get the sort of habitat tags for monsters, urban, forest, desert, etc. There's the Arctic one. I think I'm pretty happy with the list I've got, but I didn't look at a lot of different monstrosities. I've included a few obvious ones, but I think looking just at any monstrosities, because the monstrosities category or tag for monsters tends to be stuff that's kind of weird combinations of stuff. It could be stuff that just makes sense to the Lamordia, maybe something that Viktra's created or something like that. I'm going to draw from a lot of sources here. The Monster Manual, I'm probably going to be looking more at the 2014 version, but I imagine the 2024 version applies as well for most, if not all of them. Van Richten's guide, although I probably won't repeat the ones that it's already said. Curse of Strahd, Mordenheim's Tome of Foes and Vola's Guide to Monsters, both of which were updated in Mordenheim Presents Monsters of the Multiverse. So if you've got Monsters of the Multiverse, then you're covered. You don't need the other books as well. Tome of Beasts, which I did a video about, recommending some monsters for that. Flea Mortal, I think there's one suggestion from that. Fizban's Treasury of Dragons has one or two. Dragonlance, the thingy of the Shadow Queen, I forgot what it's called. I've just got Dragonlance written in my notes. Didn't put the full title, but that had some suggestions, and there might be some others as well that I haven't included in this list. But bear in mind that I appreciate you might not have all these sources. Might be an excuse to buy them, or just borrow from the ones that you do. I'm going to go through these as quickly as possible, A to Z, and on this screen over here, if you see my face looking this way, I've got the stat blocks for some of them up, so I can kind of talk more about them. So first up is, pronounce it Belly or Belai? I'm not sure. So this falls under the Icy Fae Spirits. This is a small fae that's from Tome of Beasts. I just think having a few of those flying around, they're only challenge rating 2, would work really well. Something like a Burhag or a Burhag Coven, that's from Vola's Guide to Monsters originally, updating the Monsters of the Multiverse. Makes a lot of sense. I used a mixed hag coven that had a Burhag in it when I ran Forlorn, and I just think they're really cool. They are quite a high challenge rating, and then of course if they get access to the coven spells, they're even higher again, so just be warned, maybe consider that one for a higher level party. This next one I think is absolutely perfect. I will warn you for Grizzly art about to appear on the screen. It's the Cadaver Collector from Mordenheim's Tome of Foes updated in Monsters of the Multiverse. It's a construct that goes around collecting dead bodies. Now the lore for it, I believe, says that it collects, dead bodies after a battle, for the purposes of a necromancer. Now Viktra, especially when you read Heir of Strahd, I'll talk more about this later, she would rather have fresh bodies than old rotting bodies for her experiments. Maybe this was a creation she made to acquire bodies for her, and then it failed, and then she abandoned it, and now it's just basically wandering around Lamordia collecting dead bodies, that kind of thing. Cobble Swarm, this is from Tome of Streets. I'm just picturing like one of the cities with its cobbly streets, and then one of the cobbly streets comes to life and it's a Cobble Swarm. Corpse Mound, maybe something goes wrong with the collection of dead bodies that Viktra has stored or that are in Ludendorff University, I think it is, where they've got the morgue there when people selling flesh rights. That's, you know, maybe they're animated and they all come together as a massive clump. Similar to Zombie Clot, which I think I'll probably mention later. Cranium rats, you get these as individuals and you can get them as swarms. This is from Volo's Guide to Monsters, updated in Monsters of the Multiverse. Technically, it's not true to the lore for them because they are actually a Mind Flayer minion, a Mind Flayer monster. But they're little rats with little visible brains. That just screams Lamordia and it screams Viktra to me. I don't know about you folks. I think I got the idea because in Heir of Strahd, there's a moment where there are intelligent rats controlling constructs and machines. I thought, well, imagine if it's a cranium rat controlling it, and then once the construct's defeated, the cranium rat comes out. It's almost like a two-part minion, defeat the construct and then defeat the rat afterwards. And I just think that would work so well. So even if it isn't true to the lore and it should be more a Mind Flayer monster, I would totally consider using that. Dire Trolls, their lore says that they can eat other trolls and that can cause them to go weird, or they graft flesh onto themselves. That aspect, the latter, I think works well for Lamordia. Maybe they're trolls that Viktra experimented on and then released into the wild, and they've gone kind of berserk and gone weird from there. More grisly art warning, Disimortum. I talked about this. This is the Tome of Beasts one. I talked about it in my Tome of Beasts video. Monsters for different domains of dread. Very similar to the Cadaver Collector, it likes to collect dead bodies. So, you know, you could have two of them around the Cadaver Collector on one part of the map and one of these on the other, doing the same thing but in different ways and, you know, different tactics if they fight. Draconians. So I should explain that after I read almost all the Ravenloft novels available through Kindle, I then thought, I need something else to read, and I started to read the Dragonlance novels recently, and I love Draconians. I'm actually thinking of doing a Domain of Dread where a homebrew custom one, where the Darklord is a dragon and all of its minions are Draconians, just because I love the idea of Draconians. Even though it's a different setting, I do feel like they could be a very Ravenlofty monster, being these experimented. The whole thing about them is that they are created from dragon eggs and have been corrupted using dark magic. I don't know, I just think the idea of these creatures, especially because they could be mistaken for dragonborns as well, would work well in Lamordia because of the way they've been created and stuff. I think I've got an adventure idea tied to them as well, which I'll talk about later. In Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, there's a Dragonflesh Abomination and a Dragonflesh Grafter, where essentially, like, I think a person's being grafted to a dragon or vice versa. I think both of those could work well. I actually stumbled onto this one by accident. I don't tend to dive too much into Flea Mortals compared to other sources, but I came across a Flesh Mournling, which is from Flea Mortals, and that is essentially like a flesh golem, but it's almost got like, I just love the art for it. It's got like loads of stuff kind of connected to it. I would be considering like throwing one of those in my place, fighting one of those if I was running Lamordia. Oh, another one I don't know how to pronounce. Frogasha? Yeah, don't know. Another small fae, another icy fae spirit. Have them with your bellies or bellies. You should categorise all the icy fae spirits are just the ones I can't pronounce apparently, but they look like they'd be fun to run. Frostveil, also from Tome of Beasts. Ice Maiden from Tome of Beasts. Maybe they see an Ice Maiden and they mistake it for Elise, or they see Elise and they mistake her for an Ice Maiden, something like that. I don't know, I'm getting that kind of vibe, and that's how I'd be thinking about using something like that in Lamordia. Ice Mephit, obviously, little icy dude just flying around. Lucrotters, I don't think the lore works for them, but they do look like this sort of weird mix of, well, the lore says giant badger, deer, hyena. So yeah, they kind of fit the vibe, I think. They're from Volo's Guide to Monsters, updated in Monsters of the Multiverse. Manticore from the Monster Manual, I think would work well. Mongrel Folk from Curse of Strahd. So if you've run Curse of Strahd, you might not want to use these guys, and I don't understand why you wouldn't, because it's a bit repetitive. Unless, like, I don't know, you haven't run Curse of Strahd for a while maybe, or you think that they fit so well that you will include them regardless. But in Curse of Strahd, there is a person who's doing Frankenstein type experiments similar to Viktra Mordenheim, and the mongrel folk are the result of the experiments, and they are essentially like people who've had animal things grafted onto them. Owl bears flavoured as raven bears. This is from Heir of Strahd. Basically, they are owl bears, but they're black and they have raven heads instead of owl heads. Polar bears, makes sense, monster manual. Remoras, plus there's the young Remoras variant. These are known to be in snowy, icy places, and they just look weird. They look very Lamordian to me. Rime worm, basically like an icy worm from Tome of Beasts. Rust monsters are from the monster manual, and they appear in Heir of Strahd when they first arrive into Lamordia. They pass the forest of rust and are attacked by rust monsters. And I don't want to say too much because I don't want to talk too much about the book, but you can read about it yourself. There's a cool moment where they're described as like honing in on one person because they want to eat that person's ring and kind of ignoring the other creatures and things like that. When I found this, I was ecstatic because it fits so perfectly. A steam golem from Tome of Beasts. A VRGtR, I want to say it's pronounced. These are like undead Vikings. They might not work super well, but you want to read the lore about them and see if you think they fit. But I think it'd be a cool thing of having just these kind of zombie Vikings going around, being very territorial about their burial place. Whales from the Monster Manual and sperm whales from Rime of the Frost Maiden, because it does talk in the information about whaling. Winter Wolf, Monster Manual. The Yeti and the Abominable Yeti, both from the Monster Manual. And I'm talking about zombies in general, but you could do different kinds of zombies. But zombie clot could be similar to the corpse mound I mentioned earlier. That's zombie clots from Van Richten's Guide. I would say it's more of a Fulcovnia monster than a Lamordia monster, but see what you think. And that's my monster list. I'm pretty pleased with how many I found and how they all cover sort of different aspects. Some of them are constructs, some of them are icy fae, even if I can't pronounce the names. Some of them are monstrosities. If you think I've missed anything, please let me know in the comments. Like I said, it's not only useful for me, it could be useful for other people who are going to run Lamordia. Okay, adventure ideas. So there are other ones in Van Richten's Guide. There's a table. I will point out as well, though, it's easy to miss, and I nearly missed it on when I was like looking for adventure ideas. There's a table of 4 suggestions, and the table is called Serving Dr Mordenheim. So in addition to adventure ideas, there's a separate table about the sort of quests you can do for Dr Viktra Mordenheim as well. So be sure to look at both of those. My ideas beyond what's suggested, hopefully there's no overlap, I did check. I think this one's a great one, and I don't think I'm going to take credit for this idea. I'm sure I've read this somewhere. But if there's a TPK, if you're running, say, a domain hopping Domains of Dread campaign, and you get a TPK, instead of saying game over or write new characters, the next session, your characters wake up, but they are in Lamordia. They are in a different domain of Dread. I suppose this would only really work if they're in a domain of Dread where the borders are open. It might be more complicated if the domain borders are closed, unless you find some sort of way for them to get to Lamordia, get out of that domain and get into Lamordia somehow. And you can consider making them the reborn lineage from Van Richten's Guide as well, so they get additional abilities and stuff. Maybe it's only a temporary thing, and maybe this is something maybe whether it's a session 0 thing, or just when, if you're thinking transition to this, you've just had a TPK chat to your players about if they want to carry on with their characters, but they've changed somehow. Because I think sometimes players can be really funny about that. If it's kind of foisted upon them that, oh yeah, your character's different now and they're a reborn. But yeah, that could be a potential angle. It could be this a temporary thing. So once they do this, maybe a job for Viktra, they go back and she turns them back into their live bodies and they're no longer reborn. The apparatus. Now what's funny actually is I said there was only one instance of art of Viktra in Van Richten's Guide. There is art of a creature that looks like a Frankenstein's monster. Maybe it could be Adam. If you are deciding to add Adam to your version of 5th edition Lamordia, and you come out of a device, and it does actually look like, I think it does say in the little caption for it that it's the apparatus. So maybe she wants to get hold of the apparatus, which I think historically is in Mordant. In my game I'm having it that was in Mordant, then it ended up in Darkon, then Haslik got it and moved to Haslan. So it kind of travels around a lot, and many Darklords are interested in using the apparatus to, either escape their domain or do something else. But that could be an angle. Why would Viktra want it? What would it achieve for Viktra? How would it help her goals? A great one, and again, I can't take credit for this, is the Table of Life in Markovia. So I ran Markovia and I did a video all about it. The island that's part of the Sea of Sorrows, and in 5th edition it is sapient intelligent animals, this scientist gives intelligence to animals, basically. And there is a magical table in a monastery elsewhere in the domain, and minor ick warning coming up for, content warning for this because it's a bit gross, but basically anyone who's on the table, anything can happen to them and they stay alive. So, you imagine Viktra getting hold of this table and able to do operations and procedures on people and they stay alive, that might be helpful for her. The nature of the procedure, she can't put them under anaesthetic, if anaesthetic exists, or whatever, knock them out. I think that could be a really cool angle, a really cool thing to consider. Maybe she hears of this table and she asks the PCs to go to Markovia to try and bring it to Lamordia somehow. I think in this information from Markovia is actually set into the mountain. It's in this cathedral or chapel, but it's actually atop of the mountain. So getting it removed and carting it to another domain dread could be an interesting thing to try. Another quest speed could be to get her a Tressim. So I wasn't familiar with Tressims until I read Heir of Strahd, and one of the they're not PCs, are they? One of the main characters in that has a pet Tressim, a hairless version. And when they go to the Lamordia and meet Viktra, she's fascinated by his hairless Tressim. And then she even says, I'll, do the thing you've asked me to do if you just give me the Tressim, and instead of this other quest I'm going to give you to do, and they decline because he doesn't want to give his Tressim away, which is understandable. But maybe there's this whole thing where she tries to recruit the players to find a Tressim for her from somewhere because she'd love it in her lab. Another idea from Heir of Strahd is to get fresh bodies from the university's morgue. This is the quest that Viktra in the novel gives them. They've got to go to the university in Ludendorff, sneak into the morgue, steal some bodies, and get them back to Schloss Mordenheim. I like that part of the story. I thought it was a great arc, and I think it'd make for a great adventure idea in Lamordia. When I was looking at other books for ideas, in Candlekeep Mysteries there's an adventure called The Canopic Being. It's about somebody who wants to put a mummy lord's organs into a living vessel. Sounds very Lamordian, the sort of body horror and grafting, experiments on bodies. The adventure looks like it's a very sort of deserty kind of place, like a tomb. So maybe you add it to Heir, and maybe Viktra asks the players to go there. Maybe it's because it's a rival or an old assistant of Viktra's who's gone to Heir, and maybe she doesn't want them doing what they're doing. Maybe they've got some valuable information. Maybe she wants them killed for whatever reason. I don't know the Canopic Being super well, except for obviously reading a bit about it before this adventure, but I'm sure you could potentially adapt it to make it work. Random idea I had is Erasmus van Richten, the ghost of Rudolf van Richten's teenage son. Maybe as part of Viktra's experiment, she puts him inside a body. Try to turn him back into a real boy kind of thing. And the last idea I had, going back to Draconians, I love Draconians, even though it's not Ravenloft, it's Dragonlance, it's a different setting. Maybe she wants some dragon eggs in order so she can make her own Draconian army. I don't know, but something like that could be a cool thing. I just love Draconians, and I want to run them as monsters for my players. And there's different varieties. There's some in, I think the ones in Fizban's Treasury Dragons and the ones in the Dragonlance adventure book are very similar. They've got different names, but I think they're essentially like duplicates, but flavoured slightly differently. But there are multiple Draconian. Even in spite of that, there's at least 5 different variants officially. 10 if you use all of them and vary them all slightly. Lastly, I want to talk about other stuff from Heir of Strahd you could use that I haven't already covered. I think it's good flavour for Schloss Mordenheim, that's Viktra's base, Viktra's home, for Ludendorff and the university, and it introduces the university's dean as an NPC. It could be an NPC we use, and sort of his name, his personality, things like that. I don't think he's mentioned or appears in Van Richten's guide or named. And he's even got his own flesh column as well, which I believe Viktra created for him. That just is, anyone who's like an intruder to the university or cause trouble at the university, this flesh column tears them in two, I think is the description that's used. Also gives good flavour of what the commoners are like and what the sailors, what the university students are like, what other people doing experiments beyond Viktra as well. I think there's a lot of good flavour you could use. And that's it. That is how I would be thinking about running Lamordia. The maps, the monsters, the adventures, the music I would use, etc, etc. I hope it's useful for people considering running Lamordia. If I missed stuff, no doubt I have, whether it's old sources or you found a really good map or more monster suggestions, please leave comments. I know I've said that a few times, but please, I'm pretty happy with the list and all the stuff I've provided today, but inevitably there's going to be more stuff out there I'm not privy to that will be useful to other people. What domains should I cover of this nature? I think I might do a poll. I think YouTube posts polls only allow 4 options. What I might do is flick through Van Richten's guide, find the 4 domains I like the most that I think I can provide useful info for that I might not run, and maybe you guys can, choose and let me know if there's one domain out of those 4 that you'd really like me to do a video on. I think that's probably the way I'd do it. So keep an eye out for a poll in the future. I got a busy couple of months coming up, so my videos might be less frequent for the next couple of months, but then like September onwards, I'm clear, so hopefully I can get back into the swing of doing more videos regularly September onwards, so just a heads up about that. I'm currently running Haslan for my players. I'm going to split that into 2 parts. So once we've done everything up to Hazlitt's Tower for the finale, I'll do a video. I'd say they're probably about halfway, 2/3 through Haslan, so hopefully not much longer, and I'll do my first Haslan video. Then I'll do a second Haslan video just about Hazlitt's Tower. And then after that, they're planning on going to the Shadowlands. So it'll probably be a Shadowlands video in the future. Otherwise, in the meantime, I want to do at least one more good NPCs video. I did a video about like good in terms of alignment. Not necessarily, well, they are good, I think, anyway, in terms of like their character and stuff that you can add to, domain hopping campaigns. Most of them, if not all of them, are from older lore. And same with evil NPCs, like recurring villains, people who aren't necessarily Darklords, people who can leave and, appear for a bit, and then if they retreat, you might have them appear again. I've got a few ideas for both of those, so those are potential more Ravenloft videos. I think I teased this earlier, like the new monster manual, I think there's some monsters in that are brand new, because obviously a lot of 2024 monster manual just updates 2014 monster manual, but there are also some brand new stat blocks. And I'm thinking of going through that and choosing all the ones that are brand new that would be suitable for Ravenloft. If you haven't already, please subscribe. I have a Ravenloft playlist where you can look at all the previous domains I've covered and all the previous Ravenloft videos I've done. And we will leave it there for this one. Thank you, Mist Wanderers.